James Bashford, welcome to Mindworks in Conversation. And I'm really eager to talk with you about your book, Nature Within, How the Natural World Shapes Our Minds, Bodies, and Health. And the book starts with you standing in the forest of Quebec and listening to a veery, a songbird. And so I was wondering, why was that moment the right place to start this book?
Yeah. So I I think it's because that moment became the symbol for my own reconnection with nature, almost. I don't remember being a young kid stuck in the mud and chasing birds all through the forest. This has come on later on in my adult life, and I was visiting Canada because we don't have veeries over in Europe. Um, and so I didn't know what this bird even was. The song that I heard as I was ambling on my own through a Quebec woodland, was new to me. And many people have written about the song emanating from this wonderful um, migrant bird, and it's haunting. It's eerie. It's not what you almost expect to hear in a lovely springtime woodland when the sun is shining and it's warm. And so it really got my attention, and I hope it gets the attention of readers as well in the opening chapter.
Your book begins not with looking at nature, but by listening to it. So, do you think that listening is the first step towards reconnecting with the natural world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is about listening. Um, it's about sensing in general, I think. So I open with that encounter with the Veery, an anonymous encounter. I didn't know the name of this bird until I looked it up afterwards. And then I try and break it down. What was going on in my mind when that encounter was unfolding? Because it tapped into emotions, definitely. I felt a sense of awe. I I felt that sense of quiet, almost being penetrated by this song unexpectedly. And so, yeah, I have my neurologist hat on as well at multiple times throughout the book. And so I break down the senses. How do our brains and our bodies sense the world around us? And that is just so fundamental to me. I wanted to make a point of it, and I wanted to make a point of it in the context of the natural environment. And because without those inputs, what are we? We certainly can't then output something sensible if we're not constantly sensing what's going on. And as the message unfolds, it really becomes a question of, well, we've always sensed the natural world around us. It's how we've evolved, and nothing about us in modern times is different to what our ancestors would have needed. So this becomes the sustenance that our brains feed on.
I'm wondering how you developed as a naturalist, as well as a neurologist. How did
Yeah,
that happen? What was your experience like growing up?
yeah. So you know, I my parents were not people that took me out on rainy days and got me muddy, whatever the weather. I had a very lovely childhood, but I didn't know the difference. And forgive me for using a European um, comparison here in terms of birds, but I didn't know the difference between a blue tit and a great tit 10 years ago. And I tell you what, it was a competitive edge. It was seeing my nephew, who was 6, reel off the names of every bird at a feeding station at some park, And I thought, how does a 6-year-old know more about nature than me at the age of 30? And that struck a chord with me. So maybe there was that inner competitiveness that really started all this off. But and that's human nature. But that stuck with me, and I bought a camera. Soon after that, I started taking photos of birds. It then moved on to moths. My wife had been on at me for a while. Let's get a light box for the garden and see what invertebrates are flying around, particularly moths overnight. And we did it, and I've never looked back. So I take photos of moths. That allows me to make connections. I can name them. I can share them. I can um, sometimes bore my friends and family with them, but I think something's sinking in.
What's the latest thing you've paid attention to?
Um, so yeah, I had a good encounter this week. I was out looking for a particular mushroom, um, and I'd been alerted to this mushroom because it looks like essentially a human figurine emerging from the earth. It's called the vaulted Earth Star. And, just from a linguistic point of view, what a wonderful, evocative name for a mushroom. And it's not a common mushroom. Um, and someone told me that it was under a large cedar by the gate of a graveyard in a very small village in Oxfordshire, UK. And I happened to be near there on Tuesday. So I went looking for it, not really thinking I would find this very small mushroom, but I did. And so I've got some nice pictures of it. And it really, it looks like a head on top of a torso with arms coming out. And I just love that sort of thing. That says to me, we are creatures of nature. And here is a mushroom looking very much like us. And I love, I love that. So that's fresh from this week. But it's been a nice sunny day here actually, and I've been out for a walk, taken the dog over to the local woods.
I'm really interested in your personal practice of slowing down, listening, and observing, and wondered how you incorporate that into your practice as a neurologist. What are the clinical implications?
I think being a doctor is a lot about observing and listening. As a neurologist, 95% of what we diagnose comes from the history that we hear from our patients. So, we've been trained to listen. We've been trained to look when we examine patients on the examination couch for subtle nuances, knowing what's normal, what's abnormal, what you should act upon, what you shouldn't. And I don't see any of that being different really to what I now do in a natural environment. But I think I have felt the positive response that's gone on inside me,
Mm-hmm.
and it, don't get me wrong. There are times when old habits, seep in, and you think, "Oh, I can't really be bothered for that walk today. The weather's not great. I've got that deadline around the corner." But what I've learned is there are always deadlines around the corner. And if I go for that hour walk, I will be more efficient afterwards. And so I just get my boots on and go and do it. And you always feel better for it. Always, always. And so I keep on doing it. Yeah.
You're this interesting combination of naturalist and neurologist, and I was wondering if those two things have changed your approach to how you're working with patients. How does nature fit into perhaps your prescriptions with patients?
Yeah, well, I can give a general sense that I now discuss nature with my patients.
Hmm.
I would have never done that 3 or 4 years ago. I wouldn't have had the confidence to. Uh, I wouldn't have had the belief that that was a worthy thing to mention in a general neurology clinic. Um, so I now tag it on to those general lifestyle factors that are fundamentally important. Maintaining a good sleep routine, eating a healthy, balanced diet without ultra processed foods, exercise regularly. So I now tag engagement with nature, whether it's green space, blue space, onto that discussion. And I've had lots of positive remarks back. Patients feel as though they've now been given permission to do this thing that they have always enjoyed, but maybe it's gone down to the bottom of their priority list because there are stresses and the world is a hectic, bustling place with that is just crying out for our attention every which way we look. The screens, the emails, the social media, it can be really hard to distance yourself from that. But nature gives you that excuse.
Do you follow up with your patients and find out if they've actually started this practice? I was wondering if it's a hard sell for some people to actually slow down and pay attention on purpose to what's going on around them.
Well, I think you've tapped into a general problem with lots of our neurology practice. If I see someone in a general neurology clinic, I'm encouraged by the managers to see them once, send them on their way with a list of things to tackle. So that feedback loop doesn't often get completed, and I wish it did. Um, I do have chronic patients that I see more regularly, um, uh, but I'll be honest. My main thrust of my medical research is in a disease called motor neuron disease. That's what we call it in the UK, but it's also called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease to an American audience. And there are many problems aside from going out for a walk in nature that can't be fixed in that disease. Um, so, but I've got my mind on trying to complete that feedback loop. I want to introduce nature prescriptions in general neurology clinic, for example. These are gaining traction in primary care here in the UK. Charities like the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, are doing it. Other institutions, there's a company called Dose of Nature, for example, they're doing it. But I think it can help our patients, those with chronic migraine, those with chronic fatigue syndromes, those with chronic pain.
Our environment, as you're saying, has really bombarded us with stimulation. What do you think happens to human cognition when we lose regular contact with nature?
I think the brain starts to become saturated very quickly. There's only so much our fallible brains can manage. And so it's those higher order elements of our brain processing that start to falter. Our memories, our ability to execute plans, um, for example, maybe even our language. And we see it all the time in neurology clinics. People come to us, they're young, they're clearly stressed, they're overworked, they have busy family lives. And, it's not just an absence of nature, clearly. There are lots of things going on. But nature might give these people a way back in to sort of recalibrate their senses, really, and like I say at the end of the book, to renaturalize our senses.
One of the things I think about with AI and computers in general is that they kind of serve as our peripheral brains. And we're now increasingly relying on electronic media, electronic devices to do our thinking for us. And I was wondering what your thoughts are as you've seen AI beginning to take hold.
Yeah, well, I mean, I must admit, I haven't delved into the intricacies of this connection yet. Maybe that would be the second book. But my gut instinct is we should be hesitant, not to go full throttle into it. Yeah, I had a friend the other day say the best member of his team, the most effective member of his market research team, is Claude, an AI device. And that might be true, but I do wonder how much we're then de-skilling in offloading, outsourcing these services to our technological companions, let's say. And where will that mean we'll be in 5, 10, 15 years time? Maybe we won't be able to do these thinking exercises anymore. We'll have lost that ability to critique and appraise, and assimilate information.
The idea of renaturalizing ourselves is so important now because as technology seems to be taking over, we may lose the ability to actually care for ourselves as humans have for millennia, forever. And one of the points that you make in your book is about the importance of small resets, walking, observing, recalibrating. So, how do you think meaningful change can take place through these small resets versus big gestures?
I thought long and hard how to frame the ending of the book. It's always tricky, you don't really, when you embark on an exercise like this, the ending seems so far away that you wonder how you're going to try and bring everything together. But I turned to biology. I turned to the fact that biology is constantly resetting and recycling itself. I use the example of sleep as a very relatable thing that we all do on a daily basis. We need a certain number of hours of slumber, and that's not just a passive time. Our brains are actively recuperating. They're storing the day's memories. They're offloading toxic accumulation and regulating temperature. There are many physiological ideas, behind the value of sleep. And so I just kept on thinking about that really, and how maybe it's small resets that are more valuable, and that's what biology relies on. Um, and of course, if you make a small adjustment to your lifestyle, say you decide to take one fewer flight per year, or you eat 20% less beef, or you buy 25% fewer clothes. At the end of the year, you can look back and say, right, I'm going to make another favorable adjustment. Um, and the other conceptual thing behind this is that we didn't get into the mess we're in as a planet, as a species, as a member of this ecosystem in one huge leap. It's happened little by little over many generations. And so therefore, I think the fix has to be little by little as well. Otherwise, we'll expect too much.
That's fascinating. The idea that the toxicity of our environment has been occurring through these tiny resets that we don't even notice anymore. That we're
Exactly. And, the shifting baseline syndrome is this very idea that over generations, we have this deepening amnesia of what used to be in the context of the natural world. How many butterflies were flying around, and how many bees were at our flowers, etc. What the quality of our riverways were like. And it's this rolling renormalization. With each generation that passes, we forget what it used to be. And that's the shifting baseline syndrome. But if it can shift in the wrong direction, like it has been, then we can reset it back.
We've certainly experienced pandemic amnesia already. We've already forgotten the lessons that we learned from COVID, and it reminds me of the destruction of the great library of Alexandria. How do we maintain a memory of the important things that we've accomplished, things that could really help us in the future?
All we can sense, all our brains are good at sensing, is what's around us. So I'm connecting with you today, and there are several time zones between us. Yeah. Um, and that's modern technology, and it's wonderful. And I don't want to get rid of any of that. But if we were in the same room together, we would naturally have a stronger human connection. I'd be able, it'd be using more of the senses. So there's something that's taken away when we're not dealing with things in our immediate environment. And that's then multiplied many times when we're scrolling through social media and seeing, oh, there's a wildfire in Australia, or there's a flood, or a tropical storm in the US. Those things seem very far away to me. And therefore, my brain has no good way of assimilating all of that into a framework that says climate crisis is real and this is something I need to be dealing with. Um, uh, and so I think we need to come back to just that renaturalization of our senses. And I know I keep going on about that, but I think it's so important. It retrains the brain. And you talk about amnesia. Well, the opposite of that is obviously remembering. And remembering is one of our fundamental brain outputs. So if you feed the brain with what it has been used to, what guided its evolutionary development, i.e., the natural environment, then I think all those higher order processing functions like memory, like language, they will all fall into suit, because that's what makes our species what it is. And I avoid the word special because are we special? I don't know.
One of the things I found in your book is that it's very challenging to read. There's lots of science and information that I was not intimately familiar with. And it required me, who's a slow reader anyway, to go back over and over again, looking things up and rereading passages. And so I thought the structure of your book kind of paralleled what you're suggesting we do in nature. That is to slow down, pay attention, and examine things closely. Was that a conscious decision to write that way?
I wanted to layer the content of the book so that there's a little bit of everything, uh, dependent on where you're approaching it from. So for the scientists, they can get deep into maybe some of the more, mechanistic sides of the causes of spinal muscular atrophy, which I, try and pull a metaphor out of in one chapter. But then those that like a bit more philosophical ramblings, there's a little bit of that. There's a bit of history, there's a bit of mythology, even. Um, because I wanted to break down this barrier that science is all knowing, all powerful. Science is just another discipline that humans carry out, and therefore it's made up of stories. There is a huge element of creativity and art needed in science, and it's a constantly changing set of ideas. And I kept imagining almost like the reader is kind of on a lead or a leash, and I'm unraveling it, letting them go further and further away, but then I pull them back in, hopefully, back to that central core idea that we are nature, we're reliant on nature, and we need to reconnect.
Well, your book certainly brings together a remarkable range of ideas. And as I was reading it, I was reminded of my days as an English major, wrestling with writers like James Joyce and William Faulkner. Their work weaves together so many layers of meaning, and part of the pleasure of those books, as well as your book, lies in the literary and artistic illusions they evoke. And you find yourself constantly reflecting on the imagery and the mythology, as well as the science. And the stories that surface along the way, it creates a kind of resonance where the reading experience becomes an ongoing process of discovery. One question I had too was the idea of going into nature to be restored while nature itself is the patient. It's the patient meeting the patient. And well, I was wondering what your thoughts about that are. What is the tension there that you think about?
Yeah, well, I was interested in that construct because our health is important to us all. There isn't a person on this planet that doesn't think about their own health to varying degrees, obviously. But so framing the planet Earth, as this patient, I felt was a relatable way, perhaps, of bringing people into the discussion. Now, I was cheating a little bit because I'm a doctor, so it also meant I could then lean on my medical tuition, and I thought, well, hang on, if the planet is a patient, then I can approach my my medical review of the planet in the same way I approach any patient in the clinic room. So I had the tools there kind of ready. We have to listen to the patient's history. What is the planet telling us? We have to examine them. So what are our tools? What do we see? What do we hear? We have to investigate, and then we have to make a diagnosis and come up with a prognosis and a treatment plan. And so I felt that to be a nice way of structuring certainly part two of the book. Some people might find that a bit far-fetched. But I've actually just finished reading James Lovelock's Gaia. Gaia is this concept that the Earth is one living, breathing entity that self-regulates, and everything within it exists for the purpose of Gaia. Now, that idea has its critics. I don't like some of the ways that James Lovelock approaches it. I will be honest. But I think it's a really nice idea. And I suppose that's what I'm tapping into a little bit.
I love the idea of not only of going to nature to restore ourselves, but also providing a service by attending to nature. So it's reciprocal. We're not just taking from nature, we're also caring for it. And that can have a beneficial effect on people, I would suppose, to not just take from the natural world, but also to give something back.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a very influential author. I love everything she's written, Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she, in her latest book, The Serviceberry, talks about this reciprocal relationship that capitalism relies on this idea that resources are scarce, but that's false because actually in nature things are often very abundant. If you go searching for the right berry at the right time of year, it will be in abundance, and that's how nature operates. So trying to just shift this idea into a world of giving, um, uh, not necessarily expecting something back. But yeah, this idea of community and belonging also comes in very strongly into that message.
If someone is listening to this conversation today, what do you hope they notice or do differently?
By looking for the small things within the natural world, things that are on our doorsteps. You don't have to go very far. You can go into your garden, you can look on your balcony, you can look out the window. This isn't about just seeing flying things, it's about realizing the time of the day and the changing of the seasons, and being more in tune with the lunar phases. All these things have physiological effects on us. I'm not saying go and do that all in one go, but find something that already interests you and just be inquisitive. And you might find that that then links on to something else. And before long, that's an integrated part of your daily life. The book does that for one person on this planet, then it'll have been a success.
Well, it certainly did that for me. And linking it to mindfulness, it's helping me to pay attention on purpose to the simple things that are around me. So, James, I just wanted to thank you for this time and hope we have a chance to talk again.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Tony. I really value your thoughts and interest and enthusiasm on this topic.